Thank you very much. Short words about myself. We are a governmental research institute, but we run national breeding programs for rainbow trout and then European whitefish, which is the Coregonus lavaretus. It's a salmonid species. We have been running these breeding programs for 40 years. We provide the improved genetic material for the Finnish companies, so about 80% of the genetics has roots in our breeding programs. So we are very applied. Another important thing to notice is that our research group, we have about 20 people who work on computational genetics programming, programming of software and algorithms to analyze genomic data. And we have a software called Mix99, which is for breeding value evaluation, both the pedigree-based and the genomic-based. And the software is especially focused on large data sets. The largest data sets, for example, from Ireland cattle breeding, they include 10 million animals which have been genotyped with 50K or more markers, and our algorithms are able to analyze these data. We have clients all over the world, including plant breeding companies, the major players in the world. All right. Genomic, let's start from the traditional pedigree-based selection. We know the sires, dams, and their offspring, and we use this pedigree in the genomic breeding value evaluation. And this has been extremely efficient and will always be an efficient method. The genomic selection means that across the genome, we have thousands or tens of thousands of SNP markers that cover the whole genome. And the logic is that these markers capture the genetic variation, what is there in the genome, and we summarize this in the genomic relationships of the individuals. So these are the true DNA-based relationships of the individuals, which we can, if we would genotype ourselves here, we would be able to get an estimate that how closely we are related to each other, a number. So it's more like refined pedigree based on the markers. And the assumption here is that the traits are determined by many small genes across the genome. That's the polygenetic model. So it is still a black box approach. And this genomic breeding value evaluation, it's an industry routine nowadays in all breeding programs. It's highly successful. It's superior to any previous ways. Of course, then we can ask that, can we do better? This graph you have seen already before. It's a very influential graph. It shows that to estimate genomic breeding values in aquaculture breeding programs for multiple species, when the design is that in the nucleus we have families, and the same families are, for example, tested for diseases or slaughter traits or growth, then we actually need some thousands of markers to obtain the maximum accuracy. This is the power of aquaculture breeding programs. We have same families in the reference population and in the breeding nucleus, and our breeding values are very accurate. But this is based on the assumption that we have a polygenetic trait, and in a way this starts to make sense that once you get the relationships of the individuals, you can get it with some thousands of individuals, and you get this one value that you want. And you add more markers randomly across the genome, and you don't put any special emphasis on any of the markers. Then this approach, simple genomic evaluation, works with low number of markers. But then you can think, can we do something else? I have made this sort of visionary approach that we currently have these black box breeding programs, and perhaps in the future we will not see it, but the generations that come after us, perhaps in 100 years, may see it. the science will go into this direction. If you want to have a very rapid, quick look how you can get into this one, we can talk about the IPN. This has happened for the IPN resistant in salmon. First, we knew there's family variation. Then there were QTL mapping. Breeding programs took few markers around the gene. There was fine mapping. The markers were used in the breeding programs. There's a classical graph from Movi to show that the mortalities will go down. And then there was fine mapping, which showed what is the candidate gene, and everybody was like, yes, we found the gene. And then there was a study done here, gene editing, which showed that the candidate gene was wrong, but it was another one. So the gene mapping was used to really nail down what was the gene. And this has two nice messages. When we used, or when you used the markers, they worked very efficiently when they were around the gene. Even though we thought that the gene was completely different what it actually is. And then the second message is that gene editing was used really to prove what is the gene. So in a way, in short, this is what I'm after here. IPN is a special example of this. Most of the traits that we analyze, they are polygenetic. They are determined by thousands of genes. So the potential to move here is very, very low. It may happen, but it's very, very difficult. So we skip it now, and we move what I call oligogenic traits. And what I mean is that we have traits which have large QTLs that partly determine the trait. So you can have 1, or you can have 10, or whatever. And I show an example from disease-resistant traits from aquaculture. What is a very important parameter for everyone is that how much of the genetic variance a single QTL or marker explains. And from the literature, you can see that a single QTL can explain, let's say, from 100% to 50%, 30%, 20%, 10%, or 0%. And of course, to specifically model the structure of the genome, the more a QTL explains, then the more potential there is something to do better than the normal genomic evaluation. The same patterns occur for like QTLs, salmon fillet color, maturity traits in salmonids, and so on. So in aquaculture, we have unusually a lot of QTLs compared to livestock. This is an example from Aqua Impact. This shows, let's say, a very low improvement in selection accuracy when we model the genomic structure. So the method what is used here is that if we look at the middle value here, this is a traditional genomic evaluation based on the genomic relationship matrix. We make a GWAS. There's a QTL that explains about 11% of the variation. Probably it's a true place for a gene because it has been validated. So we use the GWAS result in a way in the genomic evaluation in an iterative way that we weigh the markers based on their impact on the trait. And in this case, we get 3% increase in the accuracy. It's very low, but it directly means that we get 3% better genetic improvement in this trait. So now we are modeling the effects of the markers on the trait specifically. This has some limitations, this model, but it works with a single trait. Then take another example. This comes from Finland, from our European whitefish breeding program. And saprolegnia is a fungus disease that is currently in the Nordic countries very devastating. It's a very drastic disease for freshwater broodstock. It's killing broodstocks sometimes totally. The data is based on 1,500 fish, 5,000 DNA variants from the RAD sequencing, what we have done in-house. This trait has a QTL that explains from 10 to 50% of the genetic variation, And what we do here is that we take the top SNPs here, we model them separately as a fixed QTL, and then we also model the polygenetic effect through the genomic relationship matrix. So we separately model the QTL part and the polygenetic part, and then we sum them. And then we have the accuracy of the breeding values. If we use the traditional pedigree-based breeding value, we get accuracy of 0.38. And when we specifically model the QTL, we double the accuracy. And in the same data, we have data for body weight, so we get similar accuracy when we specifically model the QTL. And I call this a dilution, meaning that when we use all the markers and we don't make any assumptions about the QTL, then in a way the use of a lot of markers blindly, it dilutes the effect of the QTL. We don't capture it. We need to specifically model it. And this is now an extreme case that with one QTL, we can get huge improvement in the accuracy. So it's an extreme case, and perhaps even overestimation and so on. All right, then back to this one. So the message has been that perhaps if you just blindly use more and more markers, it doesn't improve things. But if you use cleverly your data, you can do much better by specifically modeling the SNP effects. And now we get to the AQUA FAANG part also. So what can we do? What can we do? We looked at the models with specific SNP effects, but then we can go to fine mapping. We can take the markers to be closer and closer to the real genes. It means that the predictive ability of the markers will remain also better in the next generations or in the more remote populations. Then we get to the functional annotation. If you have information about genes and you are able to say that what DNA variant that is related to, and we can put it into the SNP panel, then we can analyze its effect on the traits in the breeding program. Gene editing is mentioned already. With this, we can nail QTLs, and if we get the DNA variant, we can put it again into the breeding program. And the final end point is that we can update our current SNP panels. And an important, based on this information. And we can also model our data better. Then I move to this structural variance. This is of high interest, given that within the genome, there are regions that current SNP panels don't analyze. But there are indications and evidence that these regions, these structural variants actually explain part of the genetic variation. We don't capture them with the current routine used SNP panels. And you can imagine that, say, if 10%, there's some 10% of extra genetic variation behind the structural variants, we get markers to them. Then we get 10% more genetic gain, typically. So, and this is highly interesting because if we get new markers that capture this, they become like a normal tool for our breeders to be analyzed, just similar to what we normally use. So this avenue looks very interesting. And all these need to feed into the breeding programs. And typically, the information what we use is DNA variants, genotypes. And then we model them. And we want to model them in multi-trait concept in models. We may have 15 traits in a single model. We don't look at, hey, let's have a SNP panel for one disease and let's make markers for that. We have these huge multi-trait models where we simultaneously model all the traits. Now I say the critics about this part. I have put these arrows because that information is something that we can use in the breeding program. We can do in this part a lot of things which doesn't impact the breeding programs. We can put a lot of money here and it doesn't impact the breeding programs. An example, if you do gene expression study, this is all useful and good biological information, and we can use them for something else. But if you don't get a DNA variant that explains genetic variation, then the functional stuff doesn't really impact us. So you need to build the link somehow here. And typically it would be a DNA variant, a marker that we can have in the breeding program, in the SNP panel, or I don't know what markers comes out of here. And this is very important. We can use a lot of money here. Somebody else perhaps will use the information, but not the breeding programs. And what we can do here is typically, the approach that what we would have is that we have a SNP panel which has a lot of markers, and then we have multiple traits. And for a trait that is determined by few QTLs, we use out of this SNP through modeling only that information. Then in the same model, we have a polygenetic trait which is determined by thousands of genes. We model it in the polygenetic way, perhaps using the genomic relationship matrix. So we have the same SNP chip, but we model its impact in a species, trait-specific way. So rather than going to small markers, like as a next step, it makes sense, based on one of the graphs I showed previously, to go to the low-density marker panels, because sometimes you can reduce the genotyping price. But there is a possibility that actually the best way is to use all the time high-density SNP markers, make the genotyping companies to reduce the costs, for example, working across companies, making together negotiations to get the prices down, and then model separately all the traits that you are analyzing. Okay, then we make still link to this gene-assisted thing. If we repeat this circle, then it's possible to start to approach this. So all what we do based on the data what we have in the breeding programs, we want to go closer to the genes with the markers. And what is done here, we can like make the link that actually we are getting to the closer to the genes. And repeating this cycle for 100 years, we may end up here. So I think this is the concept. We have the tools to go towards this. And then we may succeed. This is what I have learned when I have been listening to people, what we learn from the breeding programs that we help in the world, and what we have learned from our work. To give an example about our data, current data in the rainbow trout breeding program, we have started it in the late 80s. We currently have in the data set more than 500,000 of fish, which are in the pedigree. We have 12 generations. We have started to genotype fish from year 14 onwards. Annually, we will get several thousands of genotype data. What we currently do is what we call a single-step evaluation. So we use all this data in a single run. In this one, we have multiple traits, body weights and maturity traits. And we traditionally have used the pedigree relationship matrix, which is the A. Then, because some of our fish are in the pedigree, some of them are genotyped, then we also have the genomic relationship matrix. It can be combined using this formula to get a combined relationship matrix in a one run. And then we get the single-step genomic breeding values. And the nice thing is that in this framework, we have the raw SNP data, which we currently use for genomic relationship matrix. But when we add here the specific use of the SNP effects in the model, and if we can do it in a multi-trait model, for example, for these traits, which some of them are polygenetic, some have large QTLs, then we have solved this issue that we can model polygenetic traits and the QTL traits in a single multi-trait run. And of course, when we start to accumulate data in the breeding programs, we will automatically see the QTLs better and better because we get more data. Typically in the publications, you see one generational data. In the GWAS, we know that when we combine data sets from generation to generation, we start to see the true QTLs in these large data sets. So this is a framework that we can use to move on to this direction. Thank you.